It's Sunday, December 18, 2022. Welcome to the 44th episode of The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can subscribe also to my 5-Minute News Daily Briefing podcast on iTunes or wherever you get yours. Joining me today is an investigator and consultant who takes an unconventional approach to fighting against domestic fascist organizations and unlawful militias. Kristofer Goldsmith, welcome back to The Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been quite the week for you. You've been on the receiving end of a lot of vitriol from Fox News and Fox News viewers, and let's just back up a little bit and explain why. You basically went on MSNBC, I think it was back on Monday, wasn't it? And the quote on the Fox News website is, MSNBC guest accuses Musk and Libs of TikTok, which is an account, of promoting Stochastic terrorism on Twitter. Am I saying that right? Or is it Stochastic? Tell me. Stochastic. I got it right the first time. Just explain to me what that is and why they're so upset about it.
Yeah. So earlier this week, I was on Nicole Wallace's show, Deadline White House, and I was there to talk about how the House Committee on Veterans Oversight, the House Oversight Committee had held a hearing on white supremacy that day, which was talking about stochastic terrorism, and also how the Southern Poverty Law Center, Michael Hayden and Hannah Gase, had gone to a Republican event, the Young Republicans of New York, where Marjorie Taylor Greene had talked about how if she had truly been involved in January 6th, she would have completed the coup and she would have been armed. So stochastic terrorism is the targeting of an individual or a group or an organization with vitriol and with hate and with disinformation. So much so that it makes it statistically likely or increases the probability of someone being inspired by that rhetoric to either harass, intimidate, or commit violence against the target. So when Fox News, wrote this article that you mentioned about how I had accused Elon Musk and this Twitter account, Libs of TikTok, run by Chaya Raichik, I think is their name, of being stochastic terrorists, they didn't actually refute that allegation.
Right.
They just reported that I said it, which became an example of stochastic terrorism in and of itself, because that article, along with a bunch of similar ones like it from other outright racist and right-wing rags, targeted me, and I woke up to hundreds of notifications across every way that I can be contacted online.
This is becoming an increasing problem since Elon Musk took control of Twitter, because now we know that his agenda, you could argue he's just trying to cause chaos and he doesn't care. But the other side of it, as I described on the show last week, is that he thinks that free speech, First Amendment rights, can also include hate speech. Mm-hmm. And he is open to seeing that play out in front of our eyes. This is very dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be even more specific about Elon's motivations, this is a man who has a lot of hate for the trans community. One of his children just recently came out as trans and is now I think trying to stay as far away from him as possible. His ex-wife became romantically involved with the trans individual, and that seems to have really pushed Elon Musk over the edge and has made him much more outwardly aggressive towards the trans community. One of the first things when he took over Twitter that he did was to basically make it more okay, according to Twitter's rules, to slander and to attack the trans community and the LGBTQ community with QAnon-like conspiracy theories, saying that they're predatory towards children, that they're, quote, groomers, right? And that lie is exactly the same lie that motivated a terrorist to attack a drag event at a bar in Colorado. That is how stochastic terrorism works. So Elon Musk and Twitter, they are not legally responsible for an act of terrorism that happens in Colorado, but they are part of building up this campaign of harassment, hate, and disinformation that inspires unstable people to violence, to murder, to terrorism.
The tragedy of this whole story is that none of it is based in truth or fact. No one is going to suffer because there are trans people in our communities or gay people marrying people of the same sex. I mean, none of it matters. It is purely thoughts. It's just thoughts that people are having that are causing this discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of this is that we are all the same. Whatever our gender assignment, whatever our choices in life. And that, for me, as a European, seeing how divisive this is in America is so very shocking, because I could understand it if there was a problem, if there was a case of a trans person being predatory. But there isn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, if anything, minority groups they make more effort to integrate into communities, to support people, to basically join in with society. It's actually these right-wing and far-right thoughts that segregate people. And these very people that are being, hateful towards you have probably never left their house. They're just sitting in front of their computers.
Yeah. Well, a lot of hate is informed by conspiracy theories, and the root of so much of white supremacy and other far-right movements is anti-Semitism. The belief that Jews control XYZ, the media, the government, the banks, whatever. And these conspiracy theories about predation against children are informed by not just ignorance, but also fear. Now, I recently saw a debate on Twitter about the words that we use, specifically homophobia and transphobia, and how, hating the LGBT community is not a phobia, it is a stance. However, some of what informs that hate is actually a phobia. There are a lot of folks who are afraid that they might be gay or they might be trans. So they do have a fear that is, based entirely on self-loathing in a way.
That's interesting, because it's different to racism in a way, isn't it? Because, racism, which is more to do with skin tone, you can't think, oh, maybe I might be black. You might kind of feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe some people do, I don't know. But, there is a very kind of physical difference here. Can I just take you back a little bit? Because I want to talk about how this bigotry grows inside people. I'm really interested. Now, I was yesterday I was watching a video from 14 years ago of you giving evidence at the Vets Against War caucus, where you are a military veteran, you have served on the front line, and some of the things you said, and I guess this is absolutely why you have insight into the minds of the far right and to people who have hatred, is because you were one of those people. Mm-hmm. and you became reformed. Some of the things you said when you gave that evidence were so interesting to me, that you just wanted to kill people who were Muslims, that you just wanted to kill people who had brown skin. You were absolutely clear about what you intended to do. As a young person, you decided to join the military. Nobody forced you to do it. Just explain to me about and I don't want to give you any kind of historic trauma here, because I know you've been through a lot. But just explain to me your mindset, or the mindset of people like you at the age of 16, 17, where you identify that you want to go to Iraq and kill brown people. What does that mean?
Yeah, so everything that you said is shocking and is hurtful, right? But it is true. I was 16 when 9/11 happened, living in New York. I personally didn't lose anybody. I lived in Long Island, but it felt like everyone around me had been personally touched by that day, losing someone or having a horrific story of survival and escape from the city. Walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, dealing with stampedes. I mean, it was horrific. It was horrifying. And even though I wasn't physically there, for me, it was traumatizing. And immediately after that, a lot of media, entertainment, at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, if there was a movie about a terrorist, that terrorist was always brown. That terrorist was almost always Muslim, right? So I started to conflate terrorism with Islam, with being Middle Eastern, and that is the difference between joining the military to serve your country in this selfless service kind of way and protect your country. These are abstract thoughts. But when you drill down, what does protect your country mean when you serve in the military? Well, in the case of someone who's in the infantry, who's carrying around a rifle every day, or someone who like me, was a forward observer, so carried a rifle and grenades and directed artillery strikes, protecting my country means killing people. And a lot of people don't ever discuss military service that way, but that is the truth. I mean, that's what the military is for. It's not just there to hand out MREs or food rations to needy people. It's to go out and kill your enemy. And part of the way that you are mentally prepared when you join the military to kill human beings is you are trained to dehumanize them on one side, and also to start thinking of human beings as targets. In World War II, when Americans stormed Normandy, right, the famous scene that we've seen in a ton of World War II movies, right?
The Normandy landings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those troops, the vast majority of them never fired their weapons. And psychiatrists and psychologists and sociologists, working for the military, studied why didn't these folks who were, under machine gun fire, who were under artillery fire, why didn't they just, pick up their weapons and start firing in the direction of the enemy? They don't even necessarily have to see anyone, just to give covering fire. Well, part of the reason is that they didn't. As human beings, you have an innate distaste for harming other human beings. In World War II, in the preparation for the storming of Normandy, all of those riflemen, those people on the front lines, people who stormed the beaches, they had been shooting at circular targets. They had been shooting at, when you think of like a dartboard, that's circular target, right? That's what they had been trained to shoot. Well, after these studies of why didn't these men fire their weapons at the Nazis, they figured out, well, we need to start shooting at human-looking targets. So that's when you start seeing silhouettes become the standard. So right. Silhouettes, it looks like I do, a bald head and shoulders, right? So everything that I ever fired at, even if it was a sighting target, a 25-yard target where I'm, zeroing in my sights, there was a silhouette on that. So to say it the way that I said it in that testimony, to say that I joined to kill brown people and Muslims, it was the truth. And for a lot of my generation of troops, people who signed up in the immediate wake of 9/11, that's why we signed up. Now, another way to say that seems less offensive is I joined to kill terrorists. but terrorists are people, right? And the way that I was describing them was to rehumanize them. And that's, part of the reason that a lot of veterans come home who did participate in war with moral injury, because they recognized that they had dehumanized the enemy, other human beings, to the point that they thought of them as less than.
How much of that dehumanization of fellow humans, how much of that indoctrination comes from the military versus just, say, American society growing up in the 90s, or because remember, George Bush sent you to the wrong war.
Yeah.
In retaliation for 9/11, sent you to the wrong war.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, you didn't know that.
Yeah,
the whole thing. We remember the whole story and weapons of mass destruction, and it turned out that Saddam Hussein was basically had a great poker face and was able to kind of convince people that he was more capable, but it wasn't him anyway. So mm-hmm. kind of what difference? We know, because I had the same feelings in England with Tony Blair, who was buddying up. There was this whole kind of Camp David bromance that I found mm-hmm. really very distasteful. So I was around for that too, and we all experienced that discomfort, and a million people in London marched against that war, and nothing was done about it. Yeah. But for you, being on the very front line of that, did it occur to you that this was just retaliating to any kind of Middle Eastern baddies and not specific to 9/11 because they didn't have any evidence at that point? Just explain how that felt.
So I deployed to Iraq for a year in January of 2005. In December of 2004, as we're preparing for this year-long deployment, I don't know if it came in the form of an official order, but it kind of came down the pipeline that when we went, we were not to waste time looking for weapons of mass destruction. And that sucked the wind out of me. Because it was like, well, what the hell did we start the war for? And why am I still going? So when I got there, I was disillusioned with the mission, because the mission had been turned on its head. And I was pissed off because, I had my view of Iraqis and of the world outside of Long Island, where I grew up, was entirely shaped by the media. And this is a time that predates like spending all, time on YouTube and really we've physically purchased encyclopedias, right? And they filled the whole bookcase, right? So this
was it all media? Was it the legacy media channels, the CBSs? Were they all kind of putting the wrong information out there?
Yeah, and and a lot of it was ignorance. I can't just blame, I can't say I was brainwashed by Fox News and NBC and whatever else. Like, I was a kid and I didn't have very much experience outside of the place that I grew up in. So, the holes in my knowledge were filled in with movies and fantasy, essentially.
I think it was the same with George W. as well.
Yeah,
I don't think you should put say I was a kid. He was a grown adult, and he still fell for the propaganda.
Yeah, and I had one of the things that I've learned, and I can't remember whose famous quote is this, but like the cure for ignorance or racism is travel, like international travel.
Yeah.
But, when my first experience on the other side of the world was in a combat zone, and I had the image of Iraqis waving American flags when the invasion happened, and instead I'm faced with Iraqi children throwing bricks at us, trying to kill us. That was very confusing. That was shocking to me, and perhaps I'm stupid for having been shocked, but I really was. And day in and day out for a year of my life, the Iraqis were rightfully pissed off that we had come in and bombed the shit out of their country and destroyed their infrastructure. And, there were countless deaths because of our invasion. And Chris Goldsmith, the kid from Long Island, was the physical manifestation of all of their problems. But it was hard for me in the moment experiencing that to not respond with hate. It was impossible for me in the moment to be understanding of their plight and understand that they're lashing out at me. And even the people who tried to blow us up and, shoot at us, not just like people throwing bricks at us, but like day in and day out, people are trying to kill you. You grow full of hate, and it doesn't require training. It doesn't require the media. It is your lived experience.
I want to ask you about the camaraderie of the people that you were, in your troop, your infantry, your brigade, whatever
platoon.
You call your platoon. Thank you. Was there a kind of baked-in racism that meant that you egged each other on in any way? Because I would assume you get a bunch of boys together in this way, and the enemy, is brown people of a completely different culture.
Mm-hmm.
Surely it's not helpful to kind of be surrounded by, was there anybody in the platoon who was like, something, I don't think these people are so bad?
It was, my experience was pretty mixed. So for context, the unit that I ended up in the 3rd Infantry Division had been part of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I got there in 2004, just a few months after they had come home from the invasion, which was a very different experience from our deployment in 2005. What for them was their second deployment, for a lot of them was their second deployment. So they had come home from an invasion of what they thought was the war that they had won. And the insurgency hadn't started yet. The Iraqi resistance didn't start yet. They weren't organized, competent militias that were killing Americans very effectively. When we deployed in 2005, it was a very different scenario for a lot of these folks, and the stories that they had told us about what it was like in Iraq were 2 years off by the time we got there. Like, things had changed over the first 3 years of the war post invasion. And as for baked in racism, our cadences when we marched or ran would include casual racism. The same way that, like, we during basic training would during bayonet training, we would be stabbing a dummy with a big knife on the end of an M16, and we'd be shouting, "Blood, blood, blood makes the green grass grow, drill sergeant." Wow. And in the moment, we thought it was stupid or we thought it was funny, but it was kind of like they were trying to train us to be able to commit violence against human beings. And I'm not going to repeat any of the slurs, but prior to the time that I deployed, Iraqis were almost exclusively referred to with what I now recognize as a racist or an Islamophobic slur. I didn't quite get that. Like, the casual racism was so baked in that I didn't see it. I didn't know that it was racist at the time. So when we got to Iraq, each of us had our own very different experiences. We could live together and work together and be together, experience all of the same things, but everyone had a different perspective. Some of us, myself included, were extremely racist and extremely angry about everything. Some not so much. There is no one singular common experience with that kind of thing.
Sure. I am just very interested in how America got so racist? You know, like how I mean, obviously we understand the history of the slave trade and, you know, the civil rights movement and then obviously having a black president didn't help because that really upset a whole lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, those are just kind of major moments in history. I'm interested in the stuff that's beneath the surface. And there are plenty of people like you who've gone into the military and come out of the military and have been deployed to places where culturally there is no, you know, it's like American exceptionalism, I guess, baked in would suggest that, well, these people don't have Chevys and they don't have, you know, Levi jeans, and therefore they can't be as good as us, right, in its simplest forms. And I think that a lot of that still goes on. And that was part of the problem with the wars, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that there was no understanding really from those who instigated this war to understand the culture, the Middle Eastern culture, and also understanding territory and how people who were born in that territory. I mean, we're seeing that now with, with Al Qaeda and you know, the management of Afghanistan. It's like, you know, this is where these people live. Like, these people were born here. So, of course, they're going to defend their territory. Of course, they're going to fight to the death. And to have the Yanks come in, you know, with their flags and their military fatigues and all of their, you know, all of this attitude, it must be very, very jarring culturally. But just bringing it back to the US, the effects of all of this racism and all of this xenophobia for decades is now playing out in hate crime, to the point that even you, as a white military vet, is on the receiving end of hatred and the potential for violence from your own comrades, right? People who you would have served with, people who you would be friends with. Are, you know, it's Americans turning on each other. It's like Lord of the Flies. And this is really now where it's come to, that it's irrelevant whether you are, you know, what race you are or what, you know, gender you are. It's like, if there's hatred to be had, someone's going to go for it. How does it feel being on the receiving end of that?
It used to be terrifying. The first time I remember exactly when it happened. It was during they called it a candidates forum. It wasn't a direct debate. Trump and Hillary Clinton, as nominees of their respective parties, went to a vets forum that was held on the Intrepid Museum, the old aircraft carrier in New York City. And I worked for a veterans organization, so I was invited to go there. And at one point during this televised forum, a young woman, I forget what branch she had served in, stood up and had the opportunity to ask a question. And she asked about what Trump would do as president to reduce the suicide rate. And I am a survivor of suicide, and that is part of what led me to become an advocate for suicide prevention. Like, I am on the board of the advisory board of the Suicide Lifeline, right? Like, this is something I take very seriously. And I was sitting behind her, and unbeknownst to me, I was in the camera shot. So I was just in the background, just a guy in the background of a crowd, right? And this woman said, you know, what are you going to do about the veterans who are dying each day? You know, there's the most recent report. It said that there were about 18 vets who were dying each day by suicide in this country. And Trump, stops her and starts mansplaining, puts out his hand and he goes, no, actually it's 22, which was an old inaccurate number, but it was a number that had become really well known. And I shook my head in disbelief. And that was all it took. Somebody, I still don't know precisely who, flagged that I did that I shook my head in disbelief at Trump mansplaining, my sister in arms, about something as important as suicide among veterans. And a neo-Nazi account on Twitter that was really popular at the time targeted me specifically and tagged me on Twitter. And that was when I had barely used the platform, and my phone was heating up from all of the notifications that I was getting with. My last name is Goldsmith, so there were anonymous neo-Nazis taking pictures of me and putting my head in an oven, putting a Star of David on my chest, making clear references to murdering Jews during the Holocaust. And that was horrifying. I had never experienced anything like that. I mean, thousands of notifications from this person's one tweet about me, from sitting in a crowd that just happened to be on camera in the background during a televised candidate forum, right? But that kind of experience, having gone through that, made me realize that it's important for folks who are privileged enough to feel safe in this type of situation to track the incoming fire. So it's not being directed at people like I was on that day in 2016, like blissfully ignorant of how bad the neo-Nazi problem in our country is.
And it's crazy because, America is a friend of Israel, the land of the Jews. Mm. And even Trump went out of his way to cozy up to Benjamin Netanyahu at the time and to, relocate the embassy to Jerusalem and all of these things, And yet it's people that align with Trump who are also anti-Semitic. The neo-Nazi movement, I'd be very interested to know how it tracks with racism generally, because, these are two issues, but ultimately white supremacy kind of connects them. I just want to talk about something that happened this week on the, I think it was on Tuesday, the 13th of December. It was Jamie Raskin, chairman of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, held a hearing to examine the ongoing threat to American democracy posed by white supremacist ideologies and how the federal government can confront domestic terrorist threats. It was called Confronting White Supremacy, the Evolution of Anti-Democratic Extremist Groups and the Ongoing Threat to Democracy. I mean, you've got the anti-Semitism, you've got the neo-Nazism, you've got the racism, and now, of course, all of this represents a threat to democracy because we saw it all come together with, white supremacists and extremists desperate to keep Trump in power so that, the white man remained supreme. I mean, people like Jamie Raskin, who is a Jew, there are so many. It's so interesting, isn't it, how many Jewish people are so desperate to kind of maintain American democracy and are going out of their ways to be, the last voices of pro-democracy in America. These types of committees are essential, aren't they? But how much change can come about when, this is becoming so ingrained in U.S. culture?
So Republicans are about to take the House, and this committee, in any hearing, Democrats are allowed to invite, or the controlling side is allowed to invite, a slate of witnesses, and the minority, which right now is the Republicans, are also allowed to invite a slate of witnesses that they interview who testify about their experiences, but it's smaller, right? Well, one of the witnesses on that day, and that's all that I could tolerate watching. Like I hunt Nazis for a living. I don't need to watch this stuff if I'm not hunting. The point of this woman being on the panel was to talk about how critical race theory was targeting white people and making white people unsafe, and trying to tie critical race theory or equate critical race theory with the threat of white supremacy. And as the Republicans take the House, those are going to be lead witnesses at very similar hearings. Yeah. We are going to have here that very committee, the House Oversight Committee, of which idiots like Jim Jordan are going to be leading, they're going to be holding hearings on the threat of critical race theory. And
let's be clear that critical race theory is not a thing. It's a module that is taught at a very advanced level in select universities, does not appear in elementary schools or in middle schools. It is something that has been harnessed by the right to kind of, embed into. And the tragedy is that parents are scared. Parents who are not critical thinkers have now fear that in some way their children will be indoctrinated. I don't know. I mean, my daughter is white and talks about having a black soul. I mean, if she's been taught anything at school, it's great as far as I'm concerned. But just explain to me how this, what the reality of CRT.
Yeah. So there are right-wing activists whose entire existence is to come up with these points of outrage. Now, things like immigration, the perennial migrant caravans that show up on Fox News every time there's an election, right? We know about those. But CRT, critical race theory, was discovered by a man named Chris Rufo. He's a far right activist and Republican strategist who and he has said as much explicitly on his own Twitter account and on shows that he saw CRT, critical race theory, an abstract legal theory that's taught to some law students who opt into it, right? It's not, again, taught to anyone else. And he recognized, well, this sounds scary, and I can redefine it, and I can say it is anti-white racism. And because his audience, these Republicans, these conservatives, the rest of the far right, they don't read. They're not critical thinkers. So what Chris Rufo was able to do was he defined critical race theory for them as anti-white racism. The same way that Ron DeSantis has helped for the whole Fox News audience define woke as anti-white racism. They don't know what woke means. They don't know that it started off as a black Twitter joke, right? Or canceled. Cancel's another phrase that they've turned into, oh, that means anti-white racism. That means you're being punished for not being woke enough, right? So canceled was a joke that came out of black Twitter that guys like Chris Rufo and other far-right activists said, aha, I can take this and I can redefine it for my idiot followers, make them scared of it, and force them to action. And now
they've done very well, haven't they? I mean, it is compelling, and things like CRT, it sounds like a thing, even though it's not a thing. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about all of these issues that these MAGA Republicans are pushing fear. They don't exist. They are just thoughts. They are just in the mind. It's just people's conscious that is creating this, as well as the right-wing media pushing these narratives. Mm-hmm. And it's that combination that is so completely terrifying, because there's no sign of it stopping. And my worry is when I see Laura Ingraham or Hannity or Carlson kind of using this rhetoric, I imagine the consequences of this, which is a whole bunch of people being executed in a gay bar, or children being executed in school. It makes no sense to me, because nobody benefits from any of this. So if nobody benefits, why do it in the first place? Is it pure tribalism? Does it just go back to that kind of, image of a perfect white America?
I would argue that you're wrong, that people do benefit from this. Republicans benefit from keeping their base scared of everything, because fear is the greatest motivator for voters. I mean, Democrats swept the 2018 Democratic Congress into office and voted in Joe Biden, in part because we were afraid, rightfully so, of losing our country, completely. But that fear of losing your country thing is so constant in the Republican rhetoric. I mean, for decades at this point, like, you're going to lose your Constitution, you're going to lose your freedoms, you're going to lose your First Amendment right. All of these, all of this rhetoric, this fear-based rhetoric, grants them power. It ensures that they get people, both the Republican base and the middle who doesn't pay attention, who's easily triggered by fear and, whatever they see on Fox News, and they vote them into power. I mean, that's why the Senate is competitive, because people are voting based on fear. That's why the Republicans took the House, because they're afraid of, because of the racist and the anti-trans and anti-LGBT more broadly rhetoric that's going on the right. If, like, I spend all day consuming right-wing media and in right-wing online spaces, they are all afraid that the trans community is going to, take their children away from them, or that Black Lives Matter, which they reduce like CRT to just initials, so BLM, that BLM is going to come into their, random rural neighborhood and start burning houses down, because they truly believe that cities burned in, over the last couple summers. So
they can't see the difference between January 6th and a Black Lives Matter protest. To them, they're one of the same. It's people being violent.
To them, it's worse. To them, what Black Lives Matter did during protests is worse. It is a greater assault on the democracy, because January 6th didn't scare them. But Black Lives Matter and the coverage that Fox News, did of it, twisting it and making things look worse than it was, and outright lying, they're afraid of Black Lives Matter. They truly believe that this movement of people who believe that Black Lives Matter are out to get them because they're white. It's, a lot of it is projection. Like, you see them say Blue Lives Matter. There's no such thing as a blue life. They say Blue Lives Matter because they think that Black Lives Matter is about black being superior to white. Well, they counter it by saying, well, blue lives, again, which doesn't exist, are superior to black, right? That is as shallow as their thinking is. And when it's, just the lizard brain doing all the thinking, it's just the fear. They don't have to rationalize any of this. They don't have to be critical about their thought. They just act on emotion. And emotion brings power at the ballot box.
But it's not just the uneducated that are falling foul of this rhetoric. It's also people who know precisely what they're doing. The Steve Bannons. These people are I wouldn't quite say he's an intellectual, but he's an eloquent person. Does he know that the whole thing is a game and it's just a play to kind of get Republican votes and to keep Trump in power? Or in his soul, does he genuinely think that white people are superior and that black people pose a threat to American, his model of America?
This, years ago, Cambridge Analytica was a scandal, right? So this firm, Cambridge Analytica, had used Facebook apps to get much more information from Facebook users than most people can even comprehend. It built personality profiles of Americans and learned what they would respond to emotionally and how they could be pushed along electoral lines. Again, a lot of it based on fear. Steve Bannon was the architect of that. So Steve Bannon understands better than practically anyone that this is a game, at least in his mind, that it's zero sum, and that you can lie and cheat and steal, because if it means your side winning and you being in a position of power, that is the only end state that matters. They don't care about progress or rights or democracy. They care
or the
about
collateral
power.
damage, because that's the biggest part of this is, let's just say hypothetically there's a police shooting, because of course we haven't even talked about how this kind of permeates through policing. But let's just say it's another black boy gets shot in the back from a police officer who's too lazy to run after him for something completely trivial. It devastates a family. It devastates a community. The knock-on effect of other humans who are destroyed from the actions that were born from Steve Bannon's rhetoric, or Cambridge Analytica, swaying or swinging the 2016 election as they did. It was, and they also did the same for Brexit in the UK. And that has not turned out very well.
Mm-hmm.
But this information warfare, this data, this is really where the value is these days. And the collateral damage is the mother of the boy who got shot by police and has no recourse, can't sue the police, can't get anything done about it. I mean, no wonder there is an increasing divide, because people are suffering, and these people, they don't get their name in the newspaper. They're just having to deal with it in private.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that's why I do what I do. A lot of people think I'm joking when I say my job is to hunt Nazis. That it is literally what I do for a living. I, both online and in person, find out where neo-Nazis are, gather evidence of their activity. When it crosses the line into criminal, I document that and send it off to the appropriate authorities. Or if someone is injured, in a legal sense, and could be a plaintiff, I provide the evidence to them so that they can pursue civil remedies. Right? There are still opportunities to preserve justice. I mean, our democracy is not yet completely broken. When I am out trying to find Nazis who attacked a black man in Boston this past summer, affiliated with these Nazis were affiliated with Patriot Front, right? I am doing that to make examples out of them, so that they and their followers and their sympathizers understand that we, the rest of us, or as the right would say, we the people, right? Co-opting that phrase, we the people are not going to lay down and take this. Like, we are going to act within the bounds of the law to ensure that justice survives.
Let's finally talk about the January 6th investigation and how this ends up. Now, we now know that January 6th was, very much a kind of far-right event. It included the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. They were kind of sent in first, some of them in plain clothes, others dressed in their militia, like waiting in vehicles. It was all they were all ready to go. And now there was an expose done earlier this week from Talking Points memo regarding Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff to Donald Trump, who exchanged texts with 34 members of Congress about plans to overturn the election. The messages included battle cries, crackpot legal theories, and invoking martial law. Mm-hmm. And my guest last week, Ron Filipkowski, talked a little bit about how he had kind of worked out how they were going to do this. They were going to use this organization to kind of rerun elections, basically, and have the National Guard protecting these polling places. I mean, it's insane, right? It just it's the stuff of insanity, and yet it happened. It happened here in the United States. It happened here at the U.S. Capitol building, and the people involved, these neo-Nazi people, the Paul Gosars, the Matt Gaetzes, these characters, they are congressmen. Mm-hmm. They're not kind of fringe actors. These are people who sit at the very heart of government. Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we know. I mean, they have so much hatred in their hearts. They claim to be patriots. They claim to be Christian. They claim to, have this kind of perfect thinking, and yet it is so completely flawed. What hope is there for the US? And Mark Meadows' cell phone is going to be the kind of linchpin for a lot of this evidence going forward. What hope is there for the United States when the Nazis that you are hunting are representing the American people in Congress?
So the United States has seen actual, like, Nazis, again, National Socialists. I'm not using a slang here when I describe Nazis. I'm talking about National Socialists, people like the swastika types, people who read Mein Kampf, who idolized Hitler, right? America has seen the rise of Nazis several times in our history, and we have defeated them each time. We had politicians rise to power, abuse their power, like McCarthy and McCarthyism, hunting people, saying that they're accusing them of being communists and putting them on blacklists and making so that not only can they not serve in government, they can't work in Hollywood or in academia or anything like that, right? Our country has seen these horrendous times before, and we've survived it. What happened on January 6th, this attempted coup, was not the first attempted coup in the United States. My nonprofit, Task Force Butler Institute, is named after former General Smedley Butler. He was a World War I, and, well, he spanned a couple generations of service, but most known for his World War I service. After World War I, veterans who served overseas were promised a bonus. Because we're on the gold standard, the Treasury literally couldn't pay them. So a lot of them were homeless. The great collapse happened of Wall Street. Thousands of them descended on Washington, D.C. and stood outside the Capitol and lived outside the Capitol on the National Lawn for months. And they were called the bonus army because they had been promised this bonus. Well, a bunch of wealthy Wall Street cats who didn't want to see our country leave the gold standard approached Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler, because he was so beloved by these troops, because he was a Marine's Marine. He was someone who cared about the little guy on the ground. And he spoke in front of the bonus army, in front of the Capitol. And they tried to convince General Smedley Butler to help them run a fascist coup, to get those troops, those former troops, those veterans who were on the National Lawn, to storm the Capitol and literally take over our country, right? So we have gotten close to coups before. We have had people engage in conspiracies against the United States. But this is the first time that we've actually seen prosecutions at this level. What happened back in 1932, 1933 with Smedley Butler and the Wall Street push, no one ever heard about that because Congress and the Justice Department didn't want to move on it. It's a piece of history that America forgot. We could have learned a bunch of lessons from it if we paid attention. But this January 6th, we've already seen the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys. We've seen convictions for seditious conspiracy. That is unprecedented at this level, and gives me a lot of hope that that we're on the path to finding justice for these insurrectionists who have thus far seemingly gotten away with trying to destroy our country.
The special prosecutor, Jack Smith, seems to be, he's not even in the US at the moment. I think he's nursing a damaged leg or something. He had a bit of an accident. But when he comes here, I mean, it's not stopping him doing his job, right? Mm. But when he comes here, I'm sure this will play out in a very interesting way. Tragically, there is a bit of a deadline, isn't there? And that is, the end of the year or certainly the start of the new Congress. But there's enough evidence now. How far up the chain is this likely to go in terms of prosecutions? Because, Donald Trump made a very big announcement this week, and there was questions as to whether or not he'd be running for speaker or if he had something else to offer. And it turned out he was providing these top trumps style cards with him as a strongman on them, which you could buy for $99. Yet another grift. Effectively just stealing money from his base because he probably has none. And this is the thing about him. The whole thing is show business. There's very little there. But he is the one that organized and orchestrated this attack on American democracy. He cares not for it. His father was associated with the KKK. He's grown up in an environment where white supremacy is his modus operandi. I mean, that is who he is. We've heard him all the time say it, use language. Look at my African American friend over there. I mean, it's painful, and yet people worship him, and he's going to sell a lot of top trumps cards. I doubt you or I will be buying them, but I know that, he just seems to keep getting away with it.
Yeah. It is, our country has a real difficult time in equal application of the of the law when it comes to billionaires or people who present themselves as billionaires in the case of Trump.
Orange privilege, I call it.
Yeah. But I honestly think that the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents case is so much more crystal clear that they're probably going to move on him on that. I do think that it's the January 6th thing. It might be difficult to convince a jury that every juror that Trump is responsible for the seditious conspiracy and for the violence and the deaths at the Capitol on January 6th. But paper crimes are a lot easier, especially when someone announces their thinking, their motivating factors. And Trump has said, these are mine.
Yeah.
They are not.
And he wants them back.
Yeah. So it's very clear that he knew that he was breaking the law, and it's a paper crime. There's literally paper evidence everywhere. So I think they're going to move on that. But that said, I do think that there is a lot yet to be learned that even the January 6th committee didn't get. One of the folks that I've been most interested in is this QAnon maniac called Joshua Macias. He's the founder of Vets for Trump, someone I've been following since 2019 when I discovered him working with, on Facebook, using his Vets for Trump Facebook page, a political page, working with foreign trolls who are infamous, who are known by name, who had been well reported on, right? That guy has been engaging in election interference. The night of the election, he drove from Virginia to Philadelphia with a Hummer full of guns to stop the steal at an election location. He was arrested for that. He was tried and found guilty for some of the crimes that were related to that. Well, on January 6th, while he was out on bail after being arrested for trying to stop the steal with a bunch of guns in Philly, he stood on an elevated level outside of the Capitol, and he was on the phone, and you can hear this in a live stream. He's talking to someone, and he says, "Can you see me now?" Talking to someone who's watching one of the cameras. And then when he gets the affirmative that yes, whoever is on the other end of the cell phone can hear him, he starts speaking to Donald Trump. And he says, "Donald Trump, you should invoke, and I'm paraphrasing, you should invoke the Insurrection Act to empower him and the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, who he's in that picture of with Enrique Tarrio and Elmer Stewart Rhodes in the parking garage, right? He's third man, Joshua Macias. The Insurrection Act was key to the coup, and to my knowledge, the FBI has not moved on Joshua Macias. I don't know that the FBI has done anything to find out who was on the other end of that cell phone. I suspect that it was someone in the White House and that it was someone watching a television or a computer screen and that they were next to Donald Trump. I want to know, was Joshua Macias along with folks like Michael Flynn, who they work closely with, was he the linchpin in this? Was he the one that connects the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys directly to the White House? I think so. That, Joshua Macy's speech to Trump on January 6th, as his buddies are hurting and, killing a cop behind him, I find that convincing. The January 6th committee hasn't said anything about Macy's yet.
There's a lot about why U.S. presidents don't get prosecuted, isn't there? I mean, it's like it's such an insult to the American system. It's like, how could you do a thing like that? And yet, American presidents don't need any qualifications to be a president. They don't need any previous experience. They don't have to have done anything good in their lives. They don't have to have criminal record checks or anything. I mean, and Trump, if they did, would have failed on all of those things. And that really is the thing that I think is most dangerous about this system and the way the Constitution operates, is that it is relying on a kind of gentleman's agreement from, a long time ago when people were different, when we didn't have the internet connecting all of these extreme organizations where information moved much slower. And the tragedy is that Trump is a perfect empty vessel for people to worship because he's done nothing for vets. Mm-hmm. He's, all those lies about how African Americans were better off under Trump. I mean, everything that came out of his mouth was false. And yet information warfare and the support of the right-wing media and cable news just facilitated this big lie that Trump did anything for anybody. The only person he's done anything for, as we now know, is himself. Mm-hmm. And that could backfire.
Yeah, I think America's the problem with our president not needing to have any qualifications for office is tremendous. But we also see this, throughout capitalism and throughout the world. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. MBS is a murderer, and he's one of the richest people on the planet, and can hold America hostage by raising oil prices. This type of thing we see with Elon Musk being so rich that he can buy up the virtual public square of Twitter and fill it with neo-Nazis and racists, and ban journalists and activists from being able to, speak truth to power, right? This systemic corruption exists all over, in all of our societies, and it's baked into our Constitution. But I think that no one has done more than Trump and now Elon Musk to promote the Eat the Rich party. I think more people today want to see the rich taxed into oblivion than at any period before, because they've seen the damage that these extremely wealthy, deranged people can do, because, money is meaningless when you're a billionaire, and they can wield more power than most governments around the world can.
Money and wealth and that kind of privilege really is the common denominator with all of these people. And I do think that Elon Musk is a case study in, it took Trump kind of 6 years to kind of cause all this trouble and become this demagogue and have people fall at his feet and give them their last dime. And Elon Musk is really doing it in just a much briefer period as an example to everybody that the wealthy and the privileged are probably not to be trusted. Mm-hmm. Kristofer, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that you went through a Fox News barrage this last week, but you've handled it very well, and I wish you luck. But I think about you a lot, because to be a Nazi chaser is not an easy job, and it comes with certain dangers. And so I send you as many good vibes as I have.
Thank you.
And hope that we get a chance to speak again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Please subscribe to The Weekend Show on YouTube or as an audio podcast. Don't forget the 5 Minute News Daily podcast, which drops every morning. It's just 5 minutes. You can hear me tell you about the day's news while you make your morning coffee. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.